All right, welcome back. I am your host, Mike Craig. Welcome to another episode of Pass the Tots, the podcast discussing all things food service. Today, just is extremely excited. Jason Richards, the CEO of Daxbot, a very, very personal robot, has decided to join us. Jason, thank you so much for being here. I'm stoked. Thank you.
Yeah, this is going to be fun. Appreciate it.
Yeah, looking forward to a good conversation today. As you could guess, we're going to talk all things robotics. We're going to talk to Jason about his background and all the things that he's experienced in the space of automation and robotics and trying to create amazing customer experiences. Hopefully, he can introduce us a little bit to Dax and the Daxbot and what makes it so special. And yeah, well, let's start here, Jason. Why don't you just introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. Yeah. So, my name is Jason. Obviously, the my background is actually not in robotics, and that's something that people ask a lot of time. I was telling Mike that we started doing a podcast a while ago where I was able just to interview a lot of people in the robotic spaces and PhDs and people that this has been their life passion, and it's fun because then I called myself the resident dumb guy. So I just got to ask questions and understand the space because my background, isn't in robotics. Actually was in the tech field, started in 2015 doing software development, ran a small software company, which is, automation in its own right. I mean, that's kind of when people think automation in a business sense, that's mostly what they're thinking is software as a service. And so got my feet there and then worked in internet infrastructure, actually, which is super helpful because understanding connectivity to the place where we are today with robotics, being in urban spaces. So then jumped in with Dax about a little over a year ago, so July of 2021. It had been an R&D project basically up into that point, and then they brought me in kind of on the commercialization side. So it's really neat to see all the different pieces come together. I mean, from a software perspective, it's neat because you're taking basically every engineering discipline and it all fits inside robotics. Software, firmware, hardware, electrical. So it's kind of fun to nerd out with the engineers.
Well, you're nerding out way above my capacity.
Yeah.
What a background. And I could see it all coming together here. And so Daxbot, newer to the market in food service, but robots, huh? Like, what is the deal with robots these days?
Yeah. It's funny because when people think of robotics, I mean, robots have been helping people for a long time. They've been on factory floors. They've been welding cars together. That's something that has been happening for a number of years, the last few decades. But when people think of, robots kind of like in movies that you'd see in Star Wars, there's a lot of infrastructure that needs to be put in place for those things to happen. Like I was saying with LTE connectivity and GPS and all the different things that are used just to get some basic robots out roaming the streets. And then you get now with the way that computers are and artificial intelligence and computer learning, machine learning, AI. It's kind of amazing to see that basically that future is actually here, and so more and more people are going to see that, and it's really interesting. I have two kids, and my youngest has this little stuffed plushie that looks like a Dax. And I think about, when I grew up and no cell phones and things like that. And now he's living in a world where, robots roam the streets because dad goes to work every day and works with robots. So it's just kind of funny.
You have robots roaming your home.
Yeah, not quite my home. Yeah. I know you asked if our Dax was going to hang out at my house, and it's a lot quieter here than it is in my office, so that's why we're recording here. But yeah, it's kind of neat.
As you look at the evolution, there's definitely been robotics and automation is a huge focus and always has been. Historically in food service, automation has been embraced on the operator side. Anything we can do to streamline efficiencies in our process,
Sure.
to create better, better flows, better workflows. People get really excited about that, and even software to some extent is that's the aim of software. But robotics and automation on the customer side is something that's new, and I think it's important to know that like there's been a history of robotics and automation, in the food service space for quite some time. Now it's
Mm.
starting to push the boundaries, onto the customer experience, and companies like Daxbot are here leading the charge. So tell me, like, in your experience with customers, what are they looking for when they hear, robots?
Yeah, I think most people don't necessarily know what to expect. Um, Dax, I won't get into the product that Dax is today, but it's interesting because a lot of times people are thinking of either that you have Terminator, right? You're going to have these humanoid robots that are going to take over the world when their eyes turn red, or they think of things that are just kind of in the way. They think of like little boxes on wheels that are just clogging up the street corners. And so the amount of people that I've talked to especially in local city government, there's like the little small scooters, the electric scooters that run
Yeah.
around cities, and a lot of city managers don't really like them. And the reason for that is that it becomes trash over time, and so it's just clogging up sidewalks and making it difficult for people to pass, and et cetera, et cetera. So that's something that people don't want either, right? And so how do we the super nerds like myself, we're excited about the future, especially with robotics and automation, because we understand that as we get there to where we think we need to go, it's going to make life a lot more fun and a lot better. But that's a very small piece. And so with DAX specifically, how do we capture the rest of the adoption curve, right? How do we take people and calm their fears about the humanoids taking over the world? And how do we also make sure that people understand this is not just going to be clutter, it's something that's actually going to be useful. So from the customer's perspective, those that interact with DAX anyway, they really like it, anywhere from like my 2-year-old, like I said, all the way to the oldest person that I know is a 94-year-old woman in a retirement community that got to meet Dax, and she was blown away because I can't imagine the technological advances a 94-year-old has seen in her lifetime, right? And all the things that have happened from the man landing on the moon, et cetera, et cetera. And now robots are going to bring me
Like,
food at
it
my
is.
house. It's pretty amazing.
And I think one of the things we were talking about before is, the evolution of robots to fulfill a task, but then to
Mhm.
kind of fulfill a task with some personality and with some style. And I think that's kind of where you're pushing the space. You maybe just introduce this idea of where you programmed and where you're seeing robotics go. There's anamorphic and canomorphic, if I got that right, and help us understand what that is, because I don't know if I can do it justice.
Yeah, no, that's fine. In robotics, there was a study that came out back in the 70s, and the idea it's called the uncanny valley. So it's where something looks human enough, but it's not quite human, that it kind of becomes creepy. And this would be probably the best example I've ever heard is like a zombie. Like it's a human, but it's not, and
No.
so that's creepy and freaky. And so especially with robotics, as they're becoming more and more lifelike, animated, um, to make sure that you don't get to the point where it's super creepy. And so anamorphic is the name for that. And so when we built Dax, we wanted to build Dax more like a pet. And so we coined the phrase canamorphic, like canine anamorphic. So canamorphic. I don't think you'll be able to Google it because I think we're the only ones that use it. But yeah, how do we make something that is more lifelike, like an entity that you want to interact with? And it's funny. I was actually just talking to the founder, so Joseph, who was kind of the brainchild behind Dax, and he said that with all the things and all the iterations that we have up into this point, he said it's amazing like how I can just walk up to it, and he said, and I know it's a piece of plastic and a lot of circuit boards, like I know what it takes to build this thing, but he'll still just walk up to the robot and say, "Hey, Dax," and be excited for to talk to this robot, which is kind of neat. With the experience thing, I mean, it's a difficult thing with if you just see a video. People can doctor videos. You can do anything with editing these days.
Yeah.
My 9-year-old is probably better at editing video than me, right? And he can make stuff happen. But it's not until you experience something in a very tangible, real sense when a robot actually rolls up to you and you realize, wow, this is actually real. Like this is actually happening. And so we want to be able to move forward in a future where that is accepted and not just something where people think it's trash or whatever. A good example, this might be a good time to talk about this, is drones, for example, could be doing a lot more for us in society. I mean, the technology's there, technology's great. We could have drones that would fly around and drop packages on people's doorsteps. But they were not introduced very well. And so a lot of people to this day still don't like just having drones flying over their heads. Or if you see a drone flying over your neighborhood, you're like, what is going on?
It feels a little creepy. Like, why am I being
Yeah,
spied on? Who's spying on
exactly.
me?
Yeah. And so making sure that in the space that we're making sure that that the robots are actually accepted in the public sphere, because we are intruding into a pedestrian space, if you will, right? The robots are going to be on sidewalks and places where people are. So we need to be very cognizant of that and make sure that it's something that people want to have, that it enhances the environment, it doesn't detract from it.
How cool is that? So, like, if I'm hearing this right, when I hear the word robot, immediately it comes to mind is this technology that's trying to assimilate itself into a human being, and that is the anamorphic kind of pathway. And
Right.
you're saying, like, look, there's probably a different way that we could do this if we build our robots to be more like our pets.
Yeah.
And inside of that, right? So, what is the role of robots in delivery service today in food service? It's really kind of streamlining some operator workflows, making
Mhm.
things easier for operators for sure. And then it's providing a nice convenience, to, if I'm a college student, just being in my dorm and able to order some food, have it delivered right down to the lobby. I just go down and there's a little robot there where I can pick it up and go, and there's convenience there. And what I'm intimating from what you're saying is, like, there's the possibilities are much more than just providing convenience. If we can design these robots to almost provide the psychological excitement that interacting with a pet could do. So is there anything that
Mhm.
Daxbot, or is there anything that you're seeing or working on right now that kind of delivers more than just food and a convenient experience?
Yeah, I mean, you hit it on the head. Where the biggest thing that we see with customers and return customers are it's the convenience factor. It's kind of the Go Puff model, right? People want stuff instantaneously, so convenience is definitely a factor. The other factor is also experience. So working with software, UX or user experience is a big thing. How do you make sure that this is actually going to be used by people and they want to tell their friends about it? So the experience factor is pretty. Obviously, it's something that we focus a lot on here at Dax. Having somebody have an experience that wows them. When they not only get their food and it's hot and it's on time and those kind of things, but at the same time they're interacting with a robot, and their science fiction movie is actually in real life and standing in front of them. It's kind of a neat thing, and I think that more and more people are being drawn towards an experience type economy. It's not just convenience. It's also there's an element to the experience, which is why you know
Yeah.
people have restaurants that have 5 stars, because people are drawn to the experience.
Yeah. Well, so maybe introduce Daxbot and tell us a little bit about Dax, and let's get into some of the unique things that Dax provides.
Yeah. So Dax. So the concept was developed back in 2015. So two brothers started lots of companies. Won't get through their whole history, but it's pretty cool. But the founder, one of the founders, Joseph, he started designing his first robot when he was 9 years old, and it was like cardboard and coffee can type thing.
Yeah.
And so it's always been something that he's been passionate and excited about. And so when he actually had some success in some other companies and had some capital to start creating Dax, it was very exciting. And so with that, all the different iterations, it was again not just an engineering project, but also like a sociology project and a psychology project. And so what are the things that people want to see and be around? To the eye color, for example, did a whole study with a research team out of OSU of what colors should these eyes be, and how should the head look, and how should the head turn, and how should it move. One of the things when they were figuring out how Dax should move on sidewalks is they didn't want it just to move like a robot, whereas a robot will basically just move straight up and then static and then straight down. So just basically turns on and turns off, kind of like a race car, right? So if you
Yeah.
got an RC car, it's pretty jerky. It just kind of like takes off and then stops, and then so it's a little unnerving, right, when you're around a fast little remote controlled car. And so what he ended up doing is he put a bicycle helmet that he modified, and I think it was an oscilloscope on his daughter, who I think was 5 at the time, and just had her run around and play, and figured out, how does a human move? How does a dog move? And we actually move in sine waves, so we don't just go straight up to speed and then plateau and then go straight back down. We actually like kind of slowly start
Strut.
and we slowly
Yeah.
stop. And so even things like that you wouldn't think about until you experience it, kind of side by side. If you had a remote control car next to Dax, you'd realize that there's a stark difference, even though the same basic components of, servo motors, wires, circuit boards are there. It's how you implement those things, which is the sociology piece, which is actually really important. Because to that end, in 2017, for example, San Francisco banned robots on their sidewalks,
Yeah.
which was fascinating because you have Silicon Valley just around the
Yeah. Right
corner.
there.
Yeah, and San Francisco is known for letting lots of things happen. So the fact that they banned robots was kind of interesting. They've opened it up a little bit now and given permits, but there's only, I think, like 10 robots allowed at any given time and whatever. And then Toronto, Ontario in Canada did the same thing, actually December of last year. And the reason for that is in both instances, there were robots that were not, they weren't thinking about the public necessarily. They
Okay.
essentially just took a remote controlled car, put a box on it, and then was running it around the sidewalks. Well, that becomes a tripping hazard, becomes an annoyance, and people don't want to do it. So the thing that we've been doing and advocating is, it's not a very large space. All the players in this space kind of know each other. And
Yeah.
so a lot of the advocating that I've been doing with people is helping them understand, we need to roll this out well, and we need to make sure that we get the feedback loop that we need from the public, so that we're not getting ourselves, banned, throughout the United States. But
So I'm an operator. I have a brand. You're saying like in the future, I should be able to expect and maybe program into my robots what my brand values are and the interactions that I would want to provide to my customers. So it's more than just the delivery, but there's actual brand communication, brand values in the flow that's coming from Dax, coming from the robots.
yeah, absolutely.
If I
Yeah.
wanted to be funny, I could be funny. If I wanted to, you're welcome, please and thank you, mind my cues. If I could, crack jokes or be helpful, ask questions, try to upsell, it all happens. I can work that into the personality of my bot.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And the thing that we've been finding is that, yeah, everybody has, like you said, their own unique flavor of what they're wanting, things like that. Do you want
Yeah.
this to be very respectful, formal? Do you want it to have fun, and be kind of the star of the crowd? Are you wanting to interact more with children, because that's a totally different animal than if you're, working with people that it's, higher class place, and your target audience is 50 to 60-year-olds, right? So all those different things are really unique, and people have kind of different expectations. So
Yeah, no. So look, I'm familiar with software development, but talk to me about programming robots. Like, what is that process like? I mean, can I come to you today and say, here's, I want Dax, and this is the experience I want Dax to provide. These are the type of interactions. What does it take to build some of these features out?
yeah, so that's a good question. So the drivetrain, the main components of what make a robot are, it needs to be able to drive somewhere, right? It needs to be
Yeah,
able to get there reliably, and communication and those types of things. Those are that's kind of a set list, if you will. And then the
yeah,
different pieces of how we want this to uh, be accepted. So the thing that makes Dax unique is it's got a head, and it turns around, not completely around like an owl, again, kind of creepy. Has the eyes, and the eyes have lots of different emotions built into them. So you can tell if Dax is sad or if he's happy or things like that. One of the funnest projects that we did recently was we did a YouTube short where we had, if you remember from Star Wars, I think it was the original Star Wars, and they go into this bar, and the bartender says that, C-3PO and R2-D2 aren't allowed, and he kicks them out. So we did the same thing with Dax, and we put Dax into the bar, and then the bartender says, "We don't serve your kind," and Dax gets sad and hangs his head. And my 9-year-old gets so offended every time he sees it. He's like, "That's not nice. He's not being nice to Dax."
Be nice to Dax.
Which is funny. We know it's a machine, but at
Yeah.
the same time, we also are, attributing, human emotion to it. So yeah, if as far as like the plug and play components of, what people are after, that's really the thing that's kind of unique about Dax is, I won't get too deep in the weeds with the nerdiness, but we created our own operating system similar to ROS, the robot operating system, but built it with an idea in mind of having more of the plug and play type components. And then for the operating system to take care of decision making on its own that doesn't require artificial intelligence. I wasn't one of the guys that made it, but it's pretty fascinating. It's neat to watch.
Cool.
But the idea is that is to be able to have a lot of plug and play components. So, for example, if you have a robot that then has, we call it the claw, has the ability to open doors and doesn't have arms. So, so if you have a claw, we turn it into a node, and then that robot boots up and says, "Oh, I have a claw now. I know what to do with this," and can just make that thing happen. Or, "Oh, I've got a fridge on board. That means I can cool things off, not just heat things up." Or I've got a backpack on. Okay, so my backpack is going to do this function instead. Or I've got a flashlight on because I'm going to go do security patrol. So I know what to do with these different things. So the plug and play aspect of it is pretty neat. We're not to the point yet where people can just call us and say, "Here's my custom robot." We're not quite Tesla yet, right? Or you can just go to a showroom and say, "These are the things I want." But the more feedback that we're getting from different places and different environments we're in, the more and more robust it's going to be.
That's very cool. In my mind, like I am fixated around this canomorphic concept just because I know the happiness that people feel when they're around, a pet, a dog, a
Yeah.
cat, and just like the satisfaction that's there. And I'm thinking to myself, if we can kind of blend that into part of an experience with a food service,
Mm-hmm.
operation, like how cool is that? This is customer service at its next levels. We'll link in the show notes some images and pictures, maybe some videos of Dax. But the thing that I love about the Daxbot is it looks almost exactly like Wally. Help me understand. Was that some of the motivation? Because I showed it to my kids and they're like, "Hey, this is Wally. Can we get one for Christmas?"
Right.
And I'm like, "Well."
Yeah. That's funny. Yeah, we hear that a lot. I don't think that was actually intentional. But yeah, I agree. It kind of looks like Wally and Eve had a baby, and that baby is Dax.
Yeah.
It's kind of a blend of the two. So no, it wasn't. I don't think that was intentional or anything like that. But you're right. A lot of the features that you see in Disney films, even in Star Wars, what are the things that make robots endearing? I mean, R2-D2 is not exactly he's not exactly cute, but why is he endearing, right?
Yeah.
Because even through his sounds, he has some sort of emotion. He's feeling something, even when he gets sad, with his beeps and things like that. It's very interesting. I mean, it's an interesting field, and the people that I get to talk to on the research side. So, Oregon State University has a great robotics program. So we were linked in with several people there. And it's interesting to see, because this is their field of study. What are the things that create the experience? And again, my background isn't in food service, so I don't know. And the funny thing is, I'm actually not a big foodie, but there are restaurants that I'll go into that I don't know what it was about it. What is it about? Is it the lighting? Is it the I don't know. You know what I mean? But when you
Yeah.
walk in, you're like, I just feel something different. And so, so it's a lot of the intangible things that people that are in the industry, I'm sure, know. And they're like, "Oh, Jason, here's the 5 things that we did so that your experience is fantastic." And it wasn't just about the food, right? It was about the entire aura, ambiance, whatever. And so so trying to take that and make those intangible things a reality as well on the customer service side. So again, when people aren't thinking, "Oh, well, this was a great experience with this robot because it drove up to me not like a race car." they didn't even think about that, right? But they just know they had a great experience with the robot, and their kid gave it a hug, and their dog was, questioning it, and
Sniffing
um,
from behind. Yeah.
yeah, it's kind of 50-50 with dogs, honestly. Some of them just freak out, and some of them want to have a new friend. So, um, but yeah, but all the different pieces of not necessarily Wally, but we learn from those things, like Star Wars or wherever, so because we realize that is kind of a cultural connection piece. Same with Wally. Like, I think
Yeah.
people see, and they not everybody, again, but a lot of people see, and they kind of want that future, like, oh, and the future is now. So cool. So how can I be a part? And so it's still on we're still on kind of the very beginning of this type of innovation.
And
Uh,
one of the things that I've appreciated about you and the direction that you have is it seems to be very thoughtful in how it gets rolled out and kind of what you're advocating for and how things get implemented because of how the perception is. And sometimes, when you think about robots, I don't know if it's always been embraced entirely. And so I think you're saying let's be holistic around the experiences we want to provide as we introduce robotics and in this type of innovation into the customer experience.
yeah,
All
yeah,
right.
absolutely.
Oh, so this is kind of a soft pivot here, but let's just say I'm a food service operator. I like the idea of robotics. I know nothing about the space, nothing about the industry, the curves, and all of that. And I come to you, Jason, and Daxbot is great. How should food service operators work with robotics? Work with companies like yours? What is the like?
Yeah,
What's the sweets the secret formula there?
yeah. Fortunately, we have a few local restaurants that have humored us, through all of the R&D that we've done, because it was a lot of trial and error on our part. So for a tech company, uh, our world is living in computers and software and putting things in screens and stuff like that. So we naturally assume that that's how everybody operates, and that's not true. And so what we found with working with lots of different restaurants over the years now is we knew that we needed to make it. We called it the least common denominator problem, because people's experience with Dax. Initially, from the time they put their order in to the time the robot shows up, a lot of that is not on us as robot operators. It's actually on the restaurant. How fast is this order actually being actioned, and is the 15-year-old barista that it's his first job, is he, how is he going to do? Is he going to make a mess? Is he going to spill inside the robot? All these things that would detract from the experience. And so we've had to do a good job of learning how to train train food service operators on, here's how we want you to interact with the robot. The robot is actually here to help you. The robot's not here to take your job. And so if we can make them an advocate, and on our team, getting on our side of the table, it makes it really simple. So the thing that we had to find, and we failed a few times, is we had to make that as seamless as possible for that lowest common denominator problem, right? So we made it as simple as possible so that when an order comes in, we don't want to have people that are food service operators have to understand anything. And so we got it here. The system we have now is, when an order comes in, we set them up with everything they need. And all it is a printer and a microphone, or a speaker, not a microphone, a speaker. So it's a printer and a speaker. It just prints off an order. This is what you have to make, has a QR code, and you just take that order and you make the food like you do all the other food.
Yeah.
The difference is you then take it out to the robot, show him the QR code, and he says, okay, opens his drawer. You give him a thumbs up, say, thanks, Dax. And then he closes his drawer, and that's it. And you don't have to do anything else. So it's fun, for that 15-year-old barista, because he's not just making the next coffee for somebody in the drive-through. He's like, oh, this one's for a robot, fun, and he goes, makes it, gets the QR code, goes out, gets to hang out with the robot for a second before he comes back and deals with humans again. So the resistance initially was because robot operators, ourselves included, were not being aware of what the food service operators needed. We
Yeah.
just were saying, hey, here's a cool technology, use it. they said, we don't want to have to learn technology. We just want things to work, right?
Yeah.
We just want this to be streamlined in our systems as easy and simple as possible. So,
It
so I've
seems
a lot.
that it's a methodical approach. I'm guessing it's probably slower than maybe being able to flip a switch and away you go. And there has to be good collaboration between the robotics company and the food service operation, and just a healthy dose of expectations around things that are going to need to change and be
Mhm.
retrained on. But then working to kind of streamline things. And it sounds like as you've learned and grown inside the food service space, you make adaptations to what the robots are going to do and how to interface with them to make the experience all the better. And I'm guessing, therefore, that your collaboration with clients is paramount, and so you need a lot of communication. You like to have those types of engagements.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. And we're checking in with them, not constantly, not bugging and nagging them, but checking in and just making sure that, we ask for, in software and different places, people are familiar with something called a net promoter score or an NPS
Yep.
score. And so the net promoter score, so we put it out to all the customers, the people that are ordering food via robot, but then we're also asking all the clients, the operators as well, and saying, hey, what would you give us out of 10 stars this week? And sometimes we don't get very good marks. And it's like, great, this is a learning opportunity, because what do we need to do better? Are we harassing you too much, too little? Are we not training you? Are we not giving you, what do you need? What do you need from us that would make this work? And again, we're not just asking the people that own the restaurants, because a lot of times they're excited because it's a new venue. It increases their brand value because they're like, hey, yeah, our restaurant, if somebody's going to get takeout, they could either get takeout, or they could have a robot bring it to them at their office and then show off to all their friends, right? So it's kind of a cool thing. And so the owners really like us, but again, it's making sure that the 15-year-old barista, like, are you good with this
can
too?
have it on
Because if we
lockdown.
can make it
Yeah.
exactly, if we can make it easy for you, then we know that it's going to be easy on your boss.
Does
So
Dax right now do any entertainment besides the delivery? I mean, singing and
well,
dancing, spouting off,
no.
sports facts.
No sports facts, no singing and dancing. We've done some events where Dax has come and done special events for people.
That's
Where
cool.
he'll come and do delivery. I think we did a delivery for. I don't remember all the details. We've done a few events like that. Where Dax comes and does things. We can
That's
make him
cool.
dance a little bit, but that is not necessarily programmed into him. That is actually more of somebody on the back end. It's like, hey, I'm just going to push a lot of buttons and do some code and make the robot spin and
That's how it
shake.
starts, right?
Yeah, exactly.
What is the role of voice technology that you see in regards to robotics, and how much development, how much investment are you spending there in developing the voice
Yeah,
technology?
it's a good question. We haven't spent a whole lot of time in the voice detection technology piece of it yet.
Hmm.
We've done a lot with the vision aspect of it. So when
Okay.
people are talking about like metadata, it's all the different pieces, and that's voice platforms. We decided to not have Dax speak in any language. And that was intentional. Again, going
Okay.
back to the canamorphic thing,
Yeah.
your dog can't talk to you, but you can tell by the dog's body language, happy, sad, excited, etc. So that was an intentional thing. But then the voice piece is, a lot of times people want to be able to interact with another human, and then Dax just be the carrier, if you will. Dax is kind of this mobile cell phone, and we've talked to some security companies and things like that. That kind of like a blue box, where if you had a robot that was patrolling, we don't necessarily want the robot to tell you what to do, or but or to be that cognizant of it, but we want to be able to have some communication through Dax back to dispatch office, things like that. There are libraries, so we call it metavision, metadata, meta
Yeah.
audio, that we're starting to explore and figuring out how do we give voice commands to Dax where you can actually understand basic commands, and then give a response. It's not like Siri that can say I didn't understand you, but to be able to give some response with body language that actually makes sense, because
Sure.
otherwise people think, and we've seen this happen a lot, they think that the robot's way more capable than it actually is. And then again, it's setting those expectations. What can this thing actually do and not? So
You, do you think then, therefore, that the more acceptable future of robots in the future is this canamorphic, where we're not trying to parallel human to human experience, but maybe more of a secondary, like a pet? Do you feel like that's a more acceptable path for robotics to go?
man, that's a good philosophical question.
Yeah.
Um, there are me personally, yeah, I think that it's probably a better route to go. Um, but the people that are working on the anamorphic side, there's a robot called Sophie that made headlines for a long time because she became a citizen of Saudi Arabia and different things like that. But uh, it's cool. But it goes for me. It goes back to the uncanny valley thing that we were talking about.
Yeah.
Is it's not lifelike enough that it is actually human. Um, it's just on that on that edge where it's like, ooh, okay, this is a little unnerving. And again, it's like psychological safety. I don't necessarily know why it's unnerving. It just kind of is, right? And so there's, I think, I think that more people would be excited about having a DAX on the sidewalk
Yeah.
today, and that might
Yeah.
change over time, than
Maybe.
having something that kind of looks like, a droid from Star Wars that is carrying a gun,
The
right?
Jetsons, right?
So
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah,
So, the way I kind of think about it in the back of my mind, I'm like, there's food service operators for sure that are listening to this and thinking, nothing beats human to human, eyes to eyes contact, customer experience, and customer service. And
sure.
making that connection is critical, right? And I think, to those people, what I would suggest is like, you're right. You never want to take away that. And you always want to have that at your, you want to have that arrow in your quiver in your food
Hmm.
service operation for sure. But to complement that, it's not to take it away, but to complement that, there are these other experiences that you can be providing that are going to connect with people in ways that a human to human can't. And having a little Daxbot that can provide a smile and just a cute, fun little engagement while I get my food, I think is brilliant, and I can see a future for
Yeah, yeah, I think we do too.
it. Well, so let's get into maybe just a few more technical questions and we'll kind of close up. But, when you look at robotics, as an organization, what data sets, what matters to you?
Man, yeah. So the data sets that are important to us, the big things again that we're working on right now is really has to do with the NPS scores. How are the customers and the clients responding and interacting? I mean, there's lots of technical data that we want to know because
Mhm.
at the end of the day, these are very complex machines, and they require a lot of service. There's a lot of it's not like you go to Google and say, Google, how do I build a food service robot?
Yeah.
And so up upkeep, maintenance. How long do these things last before you need to change out new tires, new treads? When do you need, right? I mean, there's a lot of
Yeah.
things that are just there's a ton of learning that has to go on. I know we talked about this, at one point, just about how it's not unlike where we are today. Is not unlike how the car was in like 1911, because cars in 1911, most people were still saying, how come you don't have a
I don't
horse?
need a car.
Why do
I got a horse.
yeah, why do
Stop
we
trying
need
to.
these things on our road? They're taking up space and they're smelly and they weren't reliable. They were they were and they weren't fast. So it was kind of a hobbyist thing, if you will.
Yeah.
And now today, you don't even think twice about jumping in your car, and people will drive across the entire country and
Yeah.
they get upset because they have to fill up with gas. It's like, really, that's the only thing you have to do? Like, you don't have to change the tires out, because they're melting. You don't have to change the oil. Your radiator's not exploding because they didn't understand pressure, right? So all those things have made it to where we are today. And so that's where I was saying, like, we're kind of on that cusp right now with urban robotics specifically, because
Yeah.
the wild west, if you will, of sidewalks is not a nice place for robots, really. From a machine perspective, it's tough. A lot of things can get beat up. Snow and ice and upkeep. how do you keep these things on the road? So we check a lot of those things. Like those are data sets that we care about, but those aren't interesting data sets to literally anybody else except for us, because we want to keep uptime on these things as much as possible.
Sure.
So yeah, really, it's the NPS and understanding like what is actually going to be helpful to people. And so when Joseph, the founder, had the first idea of Dax, it wasn't necessarily to make a food delivery robot. It was actually to make a robot, that was
Yeah.
going to be accepted by people that could do lots of functions. Food service just happened to be a function that is a good entry point for a couple of reasons. One is that more and more people are expecting it. It's becoming an expectation now, not just a convenience, but yeah. So I'm sure everybody in the space knows it way better than I do. So it's become an expectation. And then secondly, especially today, when they first started really doing some heavy beta testing was during the pandemic. In early 2020, people didn't want to see people. We said, well, great, we've got these little robots and we have good relationships with these restaurants that are potentially going under if we don't
Yeah.
do something.
Can't
And
stay
so
open.
it was a really cool synergy that happened. And so food delivery is kind of a natural progression. And more and more that we're seeing with labor shortages, going back to the thing you were talking about, with operators, I agree. There's nothing like having human to human interaction. I would much rather be doing this podcast in studio with you than doing it over
Yeah.
the internet. But at the same time, especially with labor and things like that, uh, people initially were, I think they were scared that robots are going to come and take a lot of jobs. I don't think that's necessarily true. I think that the robots are going to come and take jobs that don't need to be done by humans, so
Yeah.
that humans can actually do the jobs that humans need to do, right? Um, so I think
Yeah.
that's where we're at. And so that's the data that we're collecting, not just on the food service side, which is something we care about because it has to do with, lowest common denominator, how do we make this as streamlined as possible. But as we move into other verticals as well, it's, how do we serve those companies, and what are the things that they actually are looking for to help augment the employees that they have? Because if you could have, for example, if you had 20 robots, they were able to be operated by one person. Well, that's fantastic. That means you have somebody that has a really good job, helping out 20 robots, but they're literally a workforce multiplier because they're
Yeah.
doing the job of 20 people
Yeah.
simultaneously.
Yeah. I'm just curious here. So it's a great analogy of the innovation and invention of cars, 1900s, 1910s. We've got about 110 years of the evolution of the
Yeah. Yeah.
motor vehicle. Where in that phase, if you're just trying to compare it to robots, do you feel like we're at? And yeah, I'll start there.
Yeah, that's a good question. Yeah, we're probably about a decade in,
Okay.
um, into that. And when people think of robotics, there's still a lot of things that happen kind of behind the curtain. There's still a lot of manual driving that has to happen. There's still a lot of, and it's not just us. It's everybody. Everybody
Yeah.
has it.
It's true.
Yeah, it's funny being talking to other people in the space because we literally have the same barriers, and most of them are infrastructure, physical. How do we fix the laws of physics so that we can make these things work?
Fix the laws
Um,
of physics.
right. And so even when people think of like artificial intelligence, and people think, people that aren't in the space, they think that artificial intelligence is kind of the sentient being that just kind of like all knowing can adapt to all things. That's not actually where artificial intelligence is today. And we've got a long ways to go to get to that
Yeah.
point. With current technology, I was talking to somebody recently. He's a PhD in robotics. And he said, I think with current technology, it would take about 30 years to get to that point. He said, obviously, technology is going to advance. So, put some
Yeah.
factorial in there, and it could be about 10 years.
Speed it up. Yeah.
Um, but we're still quite a ways out, from that, because most of the things that artificial intelligence does today is recognizes what a stop sign looks like. It's like, oh, that's a stop sign. Cool. Okay, yeah, my 2-year-old knows what a stop sign is, right? So it's not like it's really powerful stuff, and obviously things are moving more and more that way. Um, but I'd say that's kind of where we're at is about a decade into this 120-year evolution of the vehicle, like you talked about.
you know,
Um,
I'm trying to think what was the breakthrough for automobiles? Was it Henry Ford's kind of the industrialization and the like the things that the factory line, right? Was that
Right.
innovation kind of the breakthrough for the vehicle? What are the what are some of the barriers for robotics, and that, as soon as we can solve for these, you feel like the rate of innovation will definitely pick up even more?
That's a great question. I think artificial intelligence is a key component in there, because when you're on a factory floor, for example, you can have a robot. You can tell the robot exactly how long this floor is, and it's not going
Exactly.
to change.
Yeah.
Right? You know exactly how long this hallway is, and so you can kind of create grids, and so robots are able to do that effectively over and over and over again. So that problem has been solved. When we talk about like in the Wild West, in this town that we live in, that Dax was created in, it's a great place to test robots, and it's a terrible place to have them, because we have places where there are no sidewalks. We've got places where roots are sticking under sidewalks, and you have these huge ramps, and
Yeah.
it's just hard. And how do you know, from a software perspective, it's almost overwhelming,
Yeah.
to think of like all the individual steps that you need to take. And because if I get up, after this call and I'm going to go out, and I'm probably going to be confronted with about 300 things that are going to come at me at once that I don't even think about between here and getting to the door. I'm thinking about, phone calls, text messages, emails that I need to do. I'm going to check on my kids before I'm out of here. I've got several other meetings I have to line out. But I even have to push away from this desk and stand up and turn to the left and walk and then open a door, right? So all these things that are programmable, but when you're talking about the wide world of, you could drop a robot in anywhere USA, for example, and it's just going to figure it out and go. We're a long ways from that, and
Yeah.
I think that's going to be the barrier.
And I think it's an important note here for food service operators. Like, what you said is exactly right. And I think probably what we'll see in food service is automation, where it's just one simple single task, or it's a
Mhm.
streamlined set of tasks that can be done sequentially, or there's a nice process and flow to it. And that type of automation and robotics, I think there's probably a quicker adoption curve. I think it's a little easier to kind of implement and build. And where you're at in the wild west is, hey, let's throw literally millions of variables and have this machine be able to pick it up and analyze it and make adjustments in real time, and still be able to kind of move forward with the experience that we're intending to deliver through the technology.
Yep.
Fun stuff. A lot of work. What a career. So, Jason Richards, CEO of Daxbot, where can we learn more about you? I will put link in the show notes, but where, if people are out there, they're interested in learning, wanting to chat with you, what should they do?
Yeah. So probably the best way is obviously the website, daxbot.com, DAXBOT, daxbot.com. Um, and that's probably the best way to find us, because you can find all of our social stuff, and what we're doing on YouTube and Instagram, and all the other things. And that's it's a good hub to start
Yeah.
from there. If people want to reach out to me, happy to share my email. People are emailing me all the time, and so want to actually like have a conversation. It's interesting, again, like the gamut of people, from people that are just super nerds that want to talk and see, to people that are like, hey, that'd be a cool job, or to come work for you, or people that are food service operators that said, yeah, I need 20, when can I get them? So anything in between. But yeah, if you just go to daxbot.com, and obviously there's ways to contact us there as well.
Awesome. Awesome. You promise you'll come back in the future. We got to talk more about robots and the
Yeah,
evolution.
there's a lot of fun stuff here. So yeah, it'd be fun.
As soon as you've got Dax programmed so that it's acting just like my golden retriever, I'm totally there for you. I'll get one for my kids.
Done.
Well, Jason, thank you so much for spending time with us today. Everyone else out there, I hope this was great and beneficial. There's a lot of good takeaways. Innovation, it just keeps moving. Customer experience, it keeps being the priority. Convenience is a reoccurring theme. And one of the things that stood out to me here is not only convenience today, but also just personality and flair, and representing your brand in really new and innovative ways that really have never been done before. That is the future. So, Jason, again, thank you very much. Everyone else, thanks for joining us at Pass the Tots. I'm Mike, and we'll see you next time.